Hi everyone, this is Mr. Zoeller, and today I'm going to be presenting you a screencast on the Dred Scott decision and John Brown's raid. So the first objective we're going to be looking at is students can analyze the Dred Scott decision and the reaction to it in free and slave states. So to kind of let you know what's happening in the Supreme Court case, Dred Scott is a slave who belonged to an Army surgeon who lived in St. Louis, Missouri. Scott's owner took him to his Army bases that he was posted in Illinois and Wisconsin, which both of those are free states. There is no slavery there. And then after they returned to Missouri, Dred Scott's master ends up dying, and he becomes a slave to his owner's widow. So in 1846, Dred Scott is going to sue for his freedom in the Missouri State Court, arguing that because he became free when he was living in free territory. So the lower court ruled in favor of Dred Scott, and later was appealed to the Missouri State Supreme Court, which overturned this ruling. So in 1857, Scott's case is going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices, so right on here on the right side, we have Chief Justice Taney. So a majority of the justices on the Supreme Court were Southern slaveholders, so think about that. And they had three key issues before them. Number one, the court had to rule whether or not Dred Scott is a citizen, because only citizens have the right to sue in federal court. So that's the first issue. Number two, they had to decide if Scott's time living in a free area, free soil, made him free. And then thirdly, they were looking at whether banning slavery in parts of the Louisiana Purchase with the Missouri Compromise, was that constitutional? And so I want you to kind of think about, since majority of the members on the Supreme Court are Southern slaveholders, what's their ruling going to be about this? So in the end, for the Supreme Court, they made three key decisions in the Dred Scott case. Number one, the Supreme Court said that all African Americans, whether they were free or slave, were not citizens of the country, and so they had no right to sue in court. Number two, they ruled that Dred Scott was not free and should remain a slave. So their reasoning for that is he is property, and Americans have the right to take their property to different states, and just because your property is in another state doesn't mean your property is now free of you. And thirdly, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government, the U.S. government, and state governments had no right to pass any laws stopping slaveholders taking their slaves wherever they wanted. So that means the governments in the states and the U.S. government could not ban slavery wherever they wanted to. So let's go ahead and watch this video here about the Dred Scott decision.
Nearly 250 years after Africans were first landed on America's shores, the Supreme Court of the United States would proclaim that blacks, by virtue of their race, were not persons before the law. In 1857, in a landmark decision, the Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott case that Congress had no authority to limit the spread of slavery to any territory. The Chief Justice's words stunned African Americans.
Roger B. Tawney, a Southerner, reads a decision that says that Dred Scott, as a black person, and black people generally, had never been, were not then, could never be citizens of the United States, and as such have no rights which white men are bound to respect.
Northerners were furious. "Wherever our flag floats," protested one newspaper editor, "it is the flag of slavery." When abolitionists sought ways to circumvent the Dred Scott ruling, slaveholders pressed for a federal slave law.
This is astounding. By the late 1850s, the Southerners are demanding that the federal government pass a slave code for all the territories that it acquired in the West. And obviously, Northerners aren't about to accept this kind of thing.
The battle over slavery was crippling the political process. On a bright spring morning, Congressman Preston Brooks from South Carolina entered the Senate chamber and beat Senator Charles Sumner, the fiery abolitionist, into unconsciousness.
Violence is erupting in the halls of government, on the streets of Washington, involving our lawmakers. There are people who are coming to sessions of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate armed. In fact, one letter says the only people who aren't coming with 2 guns are those who are coming with 2 guns and a knife.
So because of the Supreme Court decision and the Dred Scott case, that means that the Missouri Compromise is now unconstitutional. That means the Compromise of 1850 is now unconstitutional. And that means that any laws passed to ban slavery in areas of the country are gone. And so slaveholders are now able to take their slaves anywhere they want, according to the Supreme Court at the time. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video right now and answer questions number 1 to 7 down below, and then resume when you're ready. All right, let's go ahead and continue learning about John Brown's raid. So remember, John Brown is a radical abolitionist who wants to end slavery, and he and his son and a few other men back in Kansas during Bleeding Kansas, they're the ones that took 5 pro-slavery men out of their homes and then chopped them up with broadswords in front of their family. And so John Brown has a plan to try to end slavery. And so for our goal for John Brown's raid, you should be able to identify what is the importance of this raid. So let's go ahead and watch this video here about John.
Brother fights brother.
We fought and lost hundreds of thousands of men on both sides, fighting for what they believed was right.
In America's deadliest war.
Somebody gets tired. Somebody blinks. Somebody makes a mistake. That mistake, it's everything.
America, the story of us, continues next Sunday at 9 on History Made Every...
So for John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in Virginia, we'll look at this question in just a second. So on the night of October 16th, 1859, John Brown and 20 followers attacked and took control of the Arsenal, which is a military building that stores weapons and gunpowder in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He hoped to start a slave rebellion that would free every single slave in the South. He sent men out into the countryside to rally slaves to his cause, but no African Americans would join him. So the following night, federal troops, commanded by Colonel Robert E. Lee, we'll hear his name later during the Civil War, arrived and stormed the building in which Brown and his followers were holding out. Brown was captured, put on trial for treason, and then he was hanged on December 2nd, 1859. Many Northerners mourned John Brown, but others believed that he had been too extreme in his actions, including Abraham Lincoln. For many in the South, John Brown's raid was very worrying to them. Many leaders and newspapers began to argue that the Southern states should leave the Union to make sure another attack like Brown's would not happen again. And all across the South, you're going to have Southerners beginning to rise up in arms and begin to practice and to train so that they can prevent any other Northerners from trying to start a slave rebellion in their states. And this is right before the beginning of the Civil War. So looking at the map here, what about the location of Harper's Ferry shows that it would be an unwise place to start a rebellion. You can see it's bordered by different rivers right here. And so John Brown and his men are kind of stuck in this location. So it's not the best fortified place to attack. And so here's a picture from the attack here on Harper's Ferry. And here's a kind of a view of the area and a picture here. So here's a sign back there. So treason, all true Christians who believe in immortality through Jesus Christ alone are requested to pray for Captain John Brown. So John Brown's going to be seen as a martyr, somebody willing to die for the end of slavery in America. So in the North, many will view him that way, while Southerners are going to view him as a terrorist who's trying to cause terror and bloodshed in the South. And then here's a picture showing the hanging here of John Brown. So Colonel Robert E. Lee sent in the troops to stop this attack on Harper's Ferry. We're also going to have a future Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, who is here at this hanging with his men to make sure that no Northerners cause any problems. And there's even a young soldier who is here watching this hanging named John Wilkes Booth, who is later going to be the man who assassinates President Abraham Lincoln. And so the death of John Brown is going to be put into song. And this song is, if you listen to the tune of it, is the Battle Hymn Republic. So I'll let you go ahead and listen to it for just a few seconds here.
Oh, John Brown's body lies a moaning in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he lost his life, in struggling for the slave, his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul is marching on.
All right, so I want you to go ahead and pause the video here at the end and answer questions 8 to 13 below about John Brown's raid. And this is Mr. Zoeller. Have a great day. See you all later. Bye-bye.